Why do the wise grow quieter as they age? It is a riddle that seems simple, yet it carries centuries of human struggle within it. In youth, voices rush like rivers after the rain, loud, restless, competing to be heard. But as the years pass, those who truly understand life discover that words are like arrows. Once released, they cannot be recalled. Alan Watts once suggested that silence is not empty, but brimming with the richness of things unsaid. A Taoist sage might compare it to the valley that echoes precisely because it is hollow. The space itself gives meaning to the sound. The wise recognize that speaking less is not withdrawal, but refinement. They see how noise fills the world, political shouting, social media posturing, endless debates about nothing. Against this backdrop, silence begins to glow like gold. It is not passivity, but a powerful act of presence. Buddhism teaches that silence opens the gate to seeing reality as it is, uncluttered by the mind's chatter. In silence, truth does not need to be proven, it simply is. So, when an old soul smiles quietly, instead of joining the argument, it isn't because they lack a response. It's because they have learned that the loudest voice rarely holds the deepest truth. Silence, then, becomes not a void, but a presence stronger than any shout. And this presence is what slowly transforms the wise into keepers of stillness, guardians of a language that needs no words. Part 2. Silence versus loneliness. Silence is often mistaken for loneliness, but the two are not the same. Loneliness is the ache of separation, the feeling that something is missing. Silence, on the other hand, is wholeness. It is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. A Buddhist would say loneliness is born from clinging to people, to outcomes, to the idea that we are incomplete. Silence dissolves that illusion. When you sit quietly, you may first feel the restlessness, the mind scrambling for noise, for distraction, for another voice to assure you that you exist. But if you remain, something extraordinary happens. The anxiety begins to soften. Silence reveals that you were never truly alone, because the entire universe hums within it. The rustle of leaves, the rhythm of your breath, even the stillness between heartbeats. This is life speaking in a language older than words. Alan Watts described silence as the canvas upon which all experience is painted. Without it, sound would have no meaning, just as stars need the darkness to shine. Taoism echoes this truth. The empty space inside a clay pot is what makes it useful. Similarly, silence is not emptiness, but the hidden fullness that gives life shape. So, while loneliness shrinks the soul, silence expands it. The wise choose silence not to escape others, but to return to themselves. They know that true connection begins only when the fear of being alone has dissolved. Part 3. Silence as a mirror of the self. Silence is not merely a pause in conversation, it is a mirror, polished by stillness, where the mind is forced to see itself clearly. Most of us spend our lives running from that reflection. We bury ourselves in noise, music, chatter, endless, scrolling, anything to avoid facing what's inside. But in silence, the masks fall. The anxious thought, the hidden regret, the flicker of longing, all of it rises to the surface like sediment in clear water. The wise do not fear this encounter, they welcome it. Alan Watts often said that to know yourself, you must stop trying to escape yourself. Silence provides that raw confrontation, and though it can be uncomfortable, it is also liberating. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins in the refusal to see things as they are. When you sit in silence, you stop running, and in that moment, the truth, however difficult, becomes a friend instead of an enemy. Existential thinkers echo this. Silence reveals the absurdity of existence, but also its strange beauty. When you no longer drown it in noise, life itself stares back at you asking, "What will you do with this fleeting gift?" It is here, in the mirror of silence, that wisdom begins. Not in collecting knowledge or chasing clever words, but in learning to face the unedited version of yourself. The wise know that this inner dialogue is more valuable than 1,000 outer conversations. And so they turn inward, not in retreat, but in profound courage. Part 4. The Noise of Society. The world we live in thrives on noise. From the moment you wake, society pushes its performance onto you. The curated posts, the loud opinions, the endless debates about who's right and who's wrong. Words become costumes, carefully designed to hide insecurity. People talk not to reveal themselves, but to cover the emptiness they fear will be seen if they stop. The wise grow weary of this carnival. They see through the spectacle and recognize that much of what is spoken is not communication at all, it's theater. Alan Watts once joked that life is like a game of hide and seek, where everyone hides behind masks, pretending they are real. In truth, the loudest voices are often the most desperate to be heard, their noise a camouflage for fragility. Taoism teaches that the sage does not compete in the marketplace of noise. He steps aside, letting the parade march past. He does not need to prove, to argue, to posture. His silence itself is a refusal to play by those rules. It is not weakness, but freedom, the same freedom as water, which flows without needing applause. So when the wise man is silent in a room full of chatter, it is not because he is disengaged, it is because he understands the futility of speaking just to fill the air. He would rather guard his words like precious jewels, offering them only when they are true, necessary, and kind. Part 5. The Weight of Few Words. There is a certain gravity in the words of those who rarely speak. When silence is their default, language becomes rare, and rarity breeds value. The wise understand this instinctively. When they finally open their mouths, people lean in, sensing that the words carry weight. Like a blade sharpened by restraint, a single phrase can cut through the fog of endless chatter. In Zen tradition, this is why masters often respond to profound questions with only a few words or sometimes with silence itself. A student once asked a master about the nature of truth, and the master simply held up a flower. No lecture, no explanation. The gesture was the teaching. Words are only fingers pointing to the moon. The silence surrounding them is the night sky in which the moon shines. Alan Watts reminded us that language is a tool, not the thing itself. To speak wisely is to remember that words are maps, not territory. The wise conserve them, refusing to waste their breath on arguments that lead nowhere. When they do speak, it is like striking a match in a dark room. The flame may be brief, but it reveals everything. This is why their presence feels heavier than their speech. Their silence creates the space in which their words echo more deeply. It is not the quantity of what they say, but the quality of when and how they choose to say it. Part 6. Listening and Observation. Silence sharpens the ear in ways constant speech never can. Those who cultivate it become listeners not just of words, but of everything beneath them. The wise understand that to listen is to step aside, to allow reality to speak for itself. In silence, motives are revealed, lies unravel. The truth, once hidden under layers of noise, emerges like a seed cracking open the soil. Buddhism speaks of deep listening as a form of compassion. To truly listen is to give another being the rare gift of presence. The wise absorb not only what is said, but also what trembles behind the words. The hesitation, the longing, the fear. This attentive silence becomes more powerful than any response because it shows understanding without judgment. Alan Watts suggested that listening is a kind of meditation where the ego is set aside. It's not about preparing the next clever reply, but about hearing life itself. Taoism would add that listening is like water flowing around obstacles, soft yet unstoppable, perceiving without forcing. Most people listen only to respond, as if conversations are battlegrounds. The wise, however, listen to see. They gather clues from the smallest gestures, the tone beneath the tone. In this way, silence is not passive, it is investigative, revealing layers of reality that chatter always drowns out. And through this attentive stillness, the wise gain knowledge others overlook, not by speaking but by observing. Part 7. Silence as Rebellion. Silence can be rebellion, not the loud, fiery rebellion of banners and slogans, but the quiet refusal to play the game of falsehood. When society demands that you argue, shout, and prove yourself endlessly, choosing silence is an act of defiance. It is saying, I will not waste my spirit on noise. History remembers the rebels who spoke with stillness. Gandhi's hunger strikes were not speeches, but silence made visible. Lao Tzu, legend says, walked away from the empire rather than bend his wisdom into political words. Their silence was not submission. It was a refusal to be absorbed into the machinery of illusion. Alan Watts often warned of the trap of seriousness, where we become so entangled in society's theater that we forget life is also play. By being silent, the wise step outside the drama. They don't need to fight every falsehood, because silence itself unmasks the lie. Like a mirror that refuses to distort, it reflects things as they are. Taoism says the greatest power lies in non-action. Silence is that non-action. It resists without clashing, it confronts without violence. And in a world obsessed with noise, silence unsettles, because it cannot be controlled. The wise embody this resistance. They do not argue, they do not posture, they simply refuse to participate. And in that refusal, they are freer than anyone shouting from the stage. Part 8. Silence as healing. Silence has the power to heal in ways words never can. When wounds are fresh, words often only dig them deeper, misunderstood, misused, or spoken in haste. But silence, like a still lake after a storm, allows the mud to settle, the water to clear. The wise know that time and quiet can do what speeches and explanations cannot. Buddhism teaches that suffering is like a fire. When fed with words of anger or defense, the flames only grow. But when left alone in silence, the fire begins to fade. Mindfulness practice is rooted in this. Simply observing pain without trying to label or fix it allows it to dissolve on its own. Alan Watts once described silence as the resting place of the spirit, the pause between notes that makes the music possible. In silence, grief is allowed to breathe, anger is given space to soften, and clarity quietly emerges. The Taoists compared it to nature itself. The forest does not speak, yet it heals those who walk beneath its trees. The wise understand that silence is not avoidance. It is medicine. It creates a sacred pause where emotions untangle and hearts recalibrate. In that stillness, forgiveness has room to grow and understanding takes root. This is why, in moments of deepest pain, words often fail us. But silence, humble and patient, never does. Part 9, the language of wisdom. Wisdom does not lie in the flood of words, but in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The wise understand that truth is often too vast for language. Alan Watts would remind us that words are symbols, not reality itself. To cling to them too tightly is like mistaking the menu for the meal. Sometimes the deepest truths can only be carried in silence, like a bird gliding without flapping its wings. When they do speak, the wise choose their words like a craftsman chooses tools carefully, sparingly, and with intention. A single sentence can carry more weight than hours of argument. Zen koans embody this. Short, paradoxical statements designed to stop the mind in its tracks. The silence between the words is where the awakening happens. Taoism adds another layer. The right words must align with the right moment. A seed planted in winter cannot grow, but in spring it flourishes. In the same way, wisdom is not just what is said, but when it is said. Most of the time, silence speaks more truth than speech ever could. The wise do not fear being misunderstood. They know that those ready to listen will hear even what was left unsaid. Their language is not only sound, it is presence, timing, and the quiet power of restraint. Part 10. The gift of silence. Silence, at its core, is not weakness, but the mark of a steady soul. In a world addicted to noise, it takes courage to say nothing, to let the storm pass without being swept into it. The wise do not confuse silence with defeat. They see it as strength, the kind of strength that comes from not needing to prove, not needing to win, not needing to constantly explain. Existentialists remind us that silence is freedom. When you stop playing roles and chasing validation, you reclaim your authenticity. Taoism mirrors this by teaching that the softest thing in the world, like water, can overcome the hardest. Silence is that water, shaping reality without force. Alan Watts often laughed at humanity's obsession with seriousness. He said that life is like music, it's not about racing to the final note, but savoring the pauses along the way. Silence is that pause. It is the breath that makes the song of existence possible. So the question remains, are you using words to connect or to escape yourself? Perhaps the real invitation is to sit, even for a moment, in silence and discover the language that needs no translation. If this reflection stirred something in you, let it live on. Share your thoughts. Subscribe for more journeys into wisdom, and together we can explore the truths hidden beneath the noise.